Welcome back, everybody, to Worlds Beyond with Cam.
Yes,
and
welcome
Ron.
back. Good to be back. Sun's out. It's starting to get warmer, so my mood is improving. So hopefully this should be a fun episode.
We had some nice weather, and then it kind of went back to being gloomy and cold and rainy, and so now it seems like it's going to be a lovely Sunday where we are right now. So what's going on with you, Cam?
Not a whole lot. On Friday night, I did a ghost investigation with a local group here in New Hampshire, up in Antrim, the town of Antrim, in a abandoned mill that was once a production factory for Chicago cutlery. So we ended up finding a whole bunch of old rusty knives that had fallen through the cracks of the floor. And we did have a little bit of activity. It had a door opening and closing on its own right in front of us. And it only did that while a motion sensor detector kind of thing was going off near it. And then it stopped, and it never happened for the rest of the night. So that was a little interesting. And then a few other things. Did a little Ouija board and dowsing rods, which are two kind of controversial ghost hunting methods. I don't put a lot of stock into them, but it was still fun and interesting, and it was just cool to go around the abandoned building. It was a lot of fun. Everyone was nice.
And who was this group? Did you get this through your reporter job, or is that how you got hooked up with them? Or?
That's how I heard about it. One of the other reporters knew I was into ghost hunting, so she passed it on to me, but I wasn't covering it for the paper. It was just for my own entertainment, I guess. It was the group is I think Spirit Adventures Paranormal they're called. They're based right in the town of Antrim, and the owner Karen Tatro is her name, and she was very nice and does a lot of these kind of ghost tour kind of things. So that was it was good to meet them, and hopefully I'll be able to join them again sometime. It was a lot of fun.
Do you think you'd ever be able to like cover something like that as a kind of a just
I'm sure. Yeah, I think they would be.
Thing?
I might have even been able to cover this for the paper, although I didn't want to. It was the first time I'd gone, so I didn't want to just go in as a reporter. And these kind of more esoteric subjects, I don't want to. I mean, obviously, I would like to write about them, but I don't want to just only suggest those things.
Right.
Maybe once fall comes around, October, I might say like, oh, well, I can do some sort of spooky ghost story or something like that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that was a lot more fun than me sitting here coughing and blowing my nose all week. But anyway, we are here to talk about, I knew it was coming, Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire, which was released on April 1st or something like that. Sounds about right. Oh, no, or March 25th. March 29th.
I think it was at the end of March, because we saw it, like, I think a week
later,
or two after it had come out, and now it's a week since then. So
part of the Legendary MonsterVerse, the American adaptation of the Godzilla franchise, so to speak. And this is the fifth movie in the series. There's Godzilla, there's Kong Skull Island, there's Godzilla, King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus Kong, and now Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. So what were your initial reactions, Cam? I know this is a hot one for us because I personally did not care for the last one that much.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of Godzilla versus Kong either, and that might factor into my thoughts on this one a little bit. I think I went in with very, very low expectations.
Yeah, I did as well.
Came out enjoying it fairly well. Not that it didn't have issues. I will say, I think the best way to just sum it up is it had a lot of the same issues as Godzilla vs. Kong, but it didn't ever reach the level of, like, for lack of a better word or better phrase, insultingly stupid, because I just thought Godzilla vs. Kong just went way too dumb with, and I can't even remember all of the specifics, but the thing that comes to mind is Mechagodzilla being beaten by someone pouring a Coke on his control panel.
Right.
It just felt like just really lowest common denominator type blockbuster writing. And this one, not that it was any sort of high art or deep storytelling or anything like that. But it never reached those levels of stupidity, I didn't think. And so overall, I was fairly entertained by it. Have a few issues, but it was fine. I enjoyed it, and I think it was fairly well made for what it was.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, just to kind of cover off on the previous one, Godzilla vs. Kong was a direct sequel. It was almost a direct sequel to two movies, Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters, and it really felt like somebody had the bare bones script or just like story idea for a sequel to each of those movies separately, and then someone said, oh, well, you know, we want to get Godzilla and Kong together, so let's just smash these two sequels into one movie that now will make absolutely no sense because you got these two competing storylines. And they just, the ludicrous things they did to bring the two stories together, like Godzilla blasting his atomic breath down into China to, down into the earth to pull King Kong up because, he was a million miles away. And so how else are we going to get him there but by doing some crazy Deus Ex Machina silly thing to bring these two storylines together. And just going back, another film, Godzilla King of the Monsters was the first film that brought like multiple monsters and multiple classic Toho Godzilla characters to the screen, and did a wonderful job of that. And there was just this like scale and scope and epicness to the monster scenes and the depictions of the monsters in that film. And Godzilla versus Kong, and now continuing in this new Empire film, it just felt like a video, like a just over the top sensory overload video game in terms of the monster action to me. And it just had no scale. I mean, you could have been watching just like, I just wanted to kind of preamble that coming into my review of this film, which is to say that, like you, went in with very low expectations, and so I was entertained. This seemed to have a much more kind of like, okay, well, at least it's just one singular plot, or obviously there's a Godzilla plot and a Kong plot. They were very intentional in terms of how they come together, and this was just very standard blockbuster writing, fun action scenes. There's a lot of, they throw in a few new monsters. You always get to see Godzilla doing something that kind of similar to something that happened in one of the older Toho films. And so it was fun. The plot had a lot of explaining by the characters to kind of drag you along and make things make sense that otherwise wouldn't have. And it just feel like we went from here to here to here to there to here. But, Mothra shows up. So like overall, the performances were solid for what they were. Kaylee Hottle, I think is her name, that plays the little islander, the last islander from Kong's Island. She is very good. She's a deaf actor. She was excellent. So her performance stood out to me. Everybody else was just fine. The movie wrapped up. I mean, it was very predictable what was going to happen, wrapped up very simply and easily. There was a little bit of a kind of pull on the heartstrings between Rebecca Hall, who plays Dr. Irene Andrews, and Kaylee Hottle, who plays Gia. She's adopted her as her daughter, and she thinks she might go back to live with her people, which she discovers through the course of the movie. And then big heartfelt scene, no, I want to stay with you. We need to be, so that, So, I mean, they made an attempt to have some kind of human drama. Brian Tyree Henry was back as this like conspiracy podcaster guy, and he was there clearly as the comic relief. Dan Stevens, who I really only know from Legion, the FX X-Men show, which he was awesome in that. And I looked him up. He hasn't really been in a lot of stuff. I had thought he was in obviously Beauty and the Beast with Emma Watson, but he hasn't been in a ton of stuff. And obviously he played this guy in Legion with an American accent, and now he has this crazy, like, I don't know, Australian accent or something in this movie. So it's just really different. But all the characters were very just cut out. You're the scientist who's going to say all the stuff. You're the veterinarian who's going to be there to when Kong gets injured to fix him, and you're the comic relief guy, and you're the chosen one little girl who's going to kind of save the day and help all the magical stuff happen that needs to happen. And then we got Godzilla and Kong blasting each other. So and you know, there was some incredibly over the top action scenes, and I know I just went way too long on my just initial recap, but so overall went in with low expectations. I was entertained, but yeah, this movie, it just kind of suffers from a lot of the same kind of stuff as the previous film.
Yeah, one thing, kind of going back to your comment about scale, that was a problem in both this movie and Godzilla vs. Kong. A lot of, and even while I was watching it, it's like, yeah, you don't really get the sense that these are giant monsters. It felt almost more like a Planet of the Apes movie at times, just because even when they're in the city and destroying things, there's really not a lot of scope building, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. You know, I can only think of one scene where we saw people, you know, running from the monsters, which is usually a pretty big staple of these monster destruction scenes. Yeah, it really felt like the cities were more just playgrounds and not a lot of weight and there, not that there wasn't destruction, but it just didn't feel, especially compared to King of the Monsters and even more so the first Godzilla, because Gareth Edwards is very good at that scale building. I think you can see a lot of that in Rogue One as well. But that would be one of my major complaints, is the action was very much felt just like a basic action scene between people as opposed to giant monsters fighting. Not to say that there weren't some really cool action scenes, and some of the standout parts to me were Kong's battle scene, specifically at the beginning when he first meets other giant apes and he uses the baby Kong essentially as like a club.
Yeah,
he was just swinging him around. Yeah. That was funny. So it's not that the action wasn't fun and ridiculous and exciting, but it definitely lacked that sense of scale that we've seen in some of the past films. And then on the subject of the plot, I was a little bit annoyed that they went for another little girl who can communicate or has some sort of special connection with the monsters. I know that's not the most, it's fairly common to see in the Japanese kaiju films, but it just felt like we were seeing more or less the same, because I feel like we did that with a little bit of Millie Bobby Brown's character in King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong, and so it felt a little strange to be doing it again with a new little girl. But the way it kind of fit into the plot where she Iwu or Iwi, I think the tribe was called.
I think it's
on
Iwi.
Skull Island.
Yeah. And
so it was interesting that they tied it into that. And yes, there was a lot of exposition. I think they did a lot with Kong in terms of the story really built up around his adventure, but since he can't talk, you kind of had to have some other character kind of explain the whole setup and that sort of thing. But that being said, it wasn't as egregiously silly as, like you had mentioned, Godzilla boring a hole through the earth or pouring a liquid onto the control panel to stop the robot. So I kind of forgive it because it didn't stand out to me as anything more than just, basic exposition kind of stuff.
Yeah, and of course, you go down into the secret Iwi tunnel, and there's all the pictograms on the wall, and Rebecca Hall, interprets everything. Yeah, exactly. Right. So that we, the audience, know what's going on, and it just was. But just to go back on your scale point again, when you in Godzilla 2014, when Seattle gets blasted, I mean, you really. There was weight to that destruction, and it was San Francisco, not Seattle, and the people trying to escape, and the bridge, and that bridge scene has even been called back in the TV show, the MonsterVerse TV show, and then in King of the Monsters, when Boston gets destroyed, I mean, it's really like, you remember Millie Bobby Brown in her house, and she's hiding in the tub, and her house is falling all down around her, and I mean, it was like, really visceral. And you felt the impact of it, and you felt that, wow, this is what it would be like if these huge creatures really existed. Then fast forward to this movie where, like, Rome, like all the wonderful historical stuff in Rome just gets wiped out. The Great Pyramids just get wiped out. The iconic beach cityscape in Rio de Janeiro just gets wiped out. And it's like, nothing. And I know it's fun to see places that people know get blasted, and especially like that classic thing with Godzilla movies, like, it's always Tokyo that gets destroyed, and let's get some other cities wiped out. So from that, it's always kind of fun to see that. But at the same time, there was just nothing. Like, all this incredible history is now gone forever, just because these two big monsters were throwing each other around the room, so to speak. But so it's just kind of funny how cavalier that all was.
It's funny too, and this kind of just occurred to me, although I had thought about it or after coming out of the movie. Both Godzilla versus Kong and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire are much more focused on King Kong for whatever reason. Both of those really felt like they were Kong-centric movies. Maybe even more so this one, only because other giant apes were kind of the antagonists in this movie.
Right.
But Godzilla really has very little to do in this movie. He just kind of goes around killing monsters to assert his dominance and eventually start charging his power up, I guess.
Yep.
The big quest that he's on is to fight some giant eel sea creature kind of thing. And I was really surprised at just how quickly that all resolved. Like, the battle between him and the sea creature lasted maybe a minute, and he just kind of pulls it apart, and that's it.
I think people feel like, again, it goes back to this sort of American view of kaiju films and everything else. It's like, oh, they're so ridiculous, we in America only do really grounded stuff like Jurassic Park, that's like real dinosaurs and everything else. I think there's still this lack of comfort with just embracing the kaiju genre in American films, in my opinion. And so Kong seems to be, well, Kong is obviously the American character, and the giant ape seems more relatable than the irradiated, like, mutated whatever Godzilla exactly is. And so he's basically the Death Star cannon powering up in the background through the whole movie, and then teams up with Kong to do his little bit at the end. And the other thing, and again, people, it's whatever you want out of these movies. If you want just giant crazy monster action battles, and that floats your boat, and then you enjoyed the heck out of this film. I mean, I enjoyed watching it for the thankfully less than 2 hours we were in. That's one of the things I was going to say. This was 155, which was fantastic. It wasn't like interminable. Then that's great, but the very anthropomorphic, like almost like human-like stuff, antics that both Godzilla and Kong did, and their little team up stuff, and they did their superhero run, and and Kong has his infinity gauntlet, and just like, to me, again, it takes you out of being like this giant monster movie and turns it into just a cartoon.
That was the one other thing I was gonna touch on, was the special effects in this movie. Not that they were bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they were kind of leaning more towards the animated 3D cartoons, not style, but there was just so much CGI to do in this movie that if you have something like, maybe something a little bit more grounded, like even the first Godzilla, you didn't have realistic monkeys with hair to animate. I just think the CGI budget was probably stretched so thin with just the amount of visual effects in this movie that you can't have like a super hyper detailed realistic character like Thanos, because I never really bought into the idea that what we were seeing were real giant monsters. It always felt like we were watching more of an animated,
and I felt there was a real more so than, it was probably the same in the last film, but more so than any of the other ones, like blending the fantasy with the grounded parts. Like when you were on that beach where the Monarch base was, and it was this very, bright sunlit beach with palm trees and everything else. When you would go from that to the sort of CGI realm of where the monster, it was very noticeable. Like, okay, this is real, and these are people, that are actually, filming on location somewhere, and then, okay, now we're in cartoon world.
Right.
That was, as opposed to, any of the previous ones. I know people complain about the earlier films being too dark, and I don't disagree with that at all. But like, just thinking back to like King of the Monsters, there was the monster scenes in the Arctic and in Boston and in Mexico and Rodan. A much better job of blending the sort of real and the unreal, I guess, if you will, in those films.
Definitely. And yeah, it is funny just how quickly these MonsterVerse movies went from fairly grounded to just immediate sci-fi. They have all this crazy technology. I personally prefer the King of the Monsters was probably just about as much as I could do of the sci-fi, MCU style technology.
Oh, it's like, it's all total Stark tech now everywhere in this.
Right, they seem to keep doubling down on that, which I guess I understand to a certain extent because you want to keep making each one crazier and crazier, but I feel like as much as I didn't dislike this movie, we're kind of at the end of the MonsterVerse at this point. I feel like it's kind of running out of steam, and I think that's highlighted too by the it felt like this villain, the Scar King, who's like a giant ape, was almost a step down from the previous two movies because it's they've already used Ghidra, which in my opinion, as much as I love that they used Ghidra in King of the Monsters and how they did it, that really should have been the peak or the climax of the entire, like, to me, after you defeat Ghidra, it's like, where do you go from there? Obviously, Godzilla versus Kong, you had the gimmick of them fighting each other, and Mechagodzilla, so I didn't quite love that portrayal of Mechagodzilla, but that also seems like if not as good as Ghidra, just under Ghidra in terms of a good, for lack of a better word, boss character to fight. But Scar King just felt like, and the battle against him at the end was so quick. It almost felt like it was a big downgrade from the previous monster. So it's like, where do you go from here now? Right,
exactly. And Scar King needed that ice dinosaur thing in order to make him a formidable enough villain. Without him, he was just like some ape.
And Godzilla needed a lizard to fight that had some sort of opposite
exactly
kind of power to him.
Yeah, I think what was it called? Shumo or Shimo was the name of that monster.
Shimu, I think.
Yeah. I read that actually that there's actually test footage. That was a real creature that was going to be in one of the Heisei Toho Godzilla films, and there's actually test footage of it from the 90s, and they used that design. So that was cool. Any other thoughts? Like, what else has Wingard done besides this? I know
he's mostly done smaller budget horror movies. That's how I know him. And him and the writer of this in Godzilla versus Kong, Simon Barrett, they did a whole string of fairly well-received horror movies. They started with You're Next. That's probably their best one, in my opinion. They did The Guest, which was pretty good.
Is that the one with the grandmother and the kids go to visit?
Oh, no, that's a M. Night Shyamalan movie. The Guest it's like a friend of this woman's son who died in war comes to visit her, but he's like essentially like a super soldier, and kind of almost like Winter Soldier, his training like gets activated and he goes on a rampage through the town.
Oh jeez, I never even heard of that.
It was pretty good. Then they did Blair Witch. They did the newest Blair Witch movie, which I liked, but I had a lot of issues with it as well. They're both they have a background in kind of low budget horror. It really seems like there's kind of a pipeline of low budget horror to big budget blockbuster action movies. With Wingard, obviously, Godzilla King of the Monsters was Michael Dougherty, who did Trick or Treat. John Watts, who did all three of the Spider-Man new MCU Spider-Man movies. He started out with the movie Clown, and I'm sure there's other examples of them.
Well, the Doctor Strange, Derrickson, right?
Oh, of course, Scott Derrickson, yep. So hopefully someday I'll make a good enough horror movie and I can just move right along into Marvel.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. So And just getting back to just sort of final thoughts on this film, one of the things I thought was this film was very like consolidated. It almost seems like it's done very well. So I mean, more power to it. But like you said, a couple things. I just don't see what they can. They've had Godzilla blast and power up every which way, but Sunday, and I feel like they've really worn out the Kong character. And again, if they're going to do another one, I hope Godzilla is more front and center, and they don't have this reliance on Kong. But we'll see how that goes. But it was interesting too. This had a very small cast, if you really think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And it seemed like they were definitely trying to find ways to sort of keep the budget down as much as they possibly could. But it's done well overall. I have a lot of other kind of Godzilla nerdy thoughts about this. In the mid 70s, which is the Showa period of the Toho Godzilla films, that's when the film series, the first installment of the Godzilla film series, which was 15 films, ran out of steam and budget, and things were changing. Kids were watching TV and cartoons and in Japan, etc. And they did all these things to try to revive and keep the Godzilla films going and keep kids mostly coming to the audience. And that switch in tone toward making Godzilla, the character, and a lot of the plots and things a lot more kid oriented. And so you get films like Godzilla versus Megalon, which was just this crazy, and Godzilla doing the flying drop kick, or in Godzilla versus Hedorah, he flies using his atomic breath and all that. And so people say, oh, the people who, complain about the two most recent MonsterVerse films because they're all silly and superhero-ish. And it's like, well, that's exactly what they did with those later of the original series Godzilla films. And my only comment there is, yes, that's true. And if that's what you really love, and certainly when I was a little kid, that's probably what sucked me in. And then I got into the more serious ones later. But those films weren't done that way intentionally. They were done that way out of desperation, we have no budget. We know a lot of adults aren't going to go to see these movies, so we got to really lean into kind of appealing to children. So it's like, I think if you look back at the bones of all those movies, I think they all started out trying to be more earnest and serious films, for lack of a better way to say it. And they just ended up being silly because that's all they were able to do at that point. And they were kind of grasping at straws. But so that's my little Godzilla nerd rant. But any other final thoughts from you?
Not that I can think of. I think we covered pretty much all of my thoughts. Yeah, not a whole lot more to say, but did enjoy it fairly well despite some maybe not big, but despite some reservations.
Yeah, it was a fun Saturday afternoon in the movie theater. And certainly, kids will enjoy it that like all the smash bang 'em up monster fights. So that's a wrap on Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire. And what do we got on the docket? Well, you finished it already, and you're not going to give me any spoilers, I know. And our friend Jen and I started watching Fallout last night. You finished Fallout, so that I think will be next up. We're going to try to get through that this week. I don't have any background. We'll save comments for later, but I don't have any grounding in the video game at all, so I'm just watching it purely as a story. So that'll be interesting to see the juxtaposition between how you perceive this and how Jen and I will. But that's probably next on the docket, and there are various and sundry things coming up. But as always, we thank you for listening, and please do give us a like and a follow on our various social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, and subscribe to the podcast. We really appreciate that. We do continue to come up with ways. Both of us just happen to be really busy at this time right now. We are trying to come up with some ideas for how to do more frequent content and some additional things, and so hopefully we'll get underway with some of that pretty soon. I will also give my every episode shout out to Lockwood & Co. Please watch that Netflix show, Lockwood & Co., even though they've unfortunately and stupidly canceled it. Sign the petition to bring back that show and read the wonderful books by Jonathan Stroud. So just again, another shout out to Lockwood & Co. Add your voice to the folks that want to bring that show back, either on any platform. Definitely deserves another several seasons. So that's my public service announcement.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything. I really enjoyed Fallout as a fan of the games. From a non-fan's perspective, I might have a few more complaints about some of the dialogue and a few of the plot points. It was a little heavy-handed, but yeah, I'll let you finish it. And I am really interested in hearing your thoughts on the setting and the plot, especially because Dad seemed to be a little bit confused about it, so I was curious to see how you and Jen would react, but Dad tends to get confused at a lot of things. So.
Pretty easily, yeah. All right, on that note, we'll leave that as a teaser, and we will say, again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yep, see you on the next one, guys. Thanks for tuning in.